Welcome, I'm Suma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Exit polls shows that Japan's ruling coalition is poised to lose control of the upper house, deepening pressure on Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba amid economic strains and an August 1st U.S. tariff deadline, as opposition parties push tax cuts, spending hikes, and a far-right party gains momentum. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that Kyiv has offered a new round of direct talks with Moscow next week, as the Russia-Ukraine war continues to rage on. Intensifying aerial attacks from both sides come amid continued calls for a truce. U.S. President Donald Trump said that he would help Afghan refugees detained in the United Arab Emirates after fleeing Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. This marks a shift from Trump's previous stance, such as the termination of temporary deportation protections for Afghans back in April. South Korea's National Security Advisor Bae Sung-lak has traveled to Washington for urgent talks ahead of U.S. President Donald Trump's August 1st deadline to strike a trade deal or face heavy tariffs. This marks Bae's second trip in 2 weeks as Seoul moves to intensify negotiations on trade and security. Iran, Britain, France, and Germany have agreed in principle to hold talks on Iran's nuclear program next week. According to Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency, the move comes amid warnings of the reimposition of international sanctions. At least 67 people were killed and dozens more wounded by Israeli fire while waiting for UN aid trucks in northern Gaza, according to Gaza's health ministry. This follows the deaths of 44 aid seekers on Saturday and comes amid new Israeli evacuation orders in areas crowded with displaced civilians. Typhoon Waifa has slammed Hong Kong with heavy rain and strong winds, toppling trees and sending over 200 people to temporary shelters. Hong Kong's Weather Observatory lowered the typhoon warning to a number 3 strong wind signal by 7:45 p.m. local time as conditions eased. Kenyan police have arrested prominent human rights activist Boniface Mwangi, accusing him of facilitating terrorist acts during last month's deadly anti-government protests. The Directorate of Criminal Investigation said Mwangi was detained in Machakos County now. Russian President Vladimir Putin has met with Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's top advisor, Ali Larijani, for talks focused on the Middle East and Tehran's nuclear program. The Kremlin says both sides discussed the growing regional tensions and the path forward on Iran's atomic activities. Putin reaffirmed Moscow's support for political resolution and regional stability. Meanwhile, Iran says it has agreed in principle to resume nuclear talks with the UK, France, and Germany. Talks with the US remain stalled, especially after last month's joint Israeli-US strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. Tehran is demanding guarantees against future attacks. Now we're joined by Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst joining us live from Taiwan. Thank you, Ross, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, what strategic interests drive Russia's continued engagement with Iran? Also, what are the potential consequences if Russia positioning itself as a mediator or supporter for Iran's nuclear stance, continuing this?
These two countries enjoy a very close economic and military partnership. Iran has been a supplier of drones and related technology to Russia throughout the war or following Russia's invasion of Ukraine over 3 years ago. That relationship, that military relationship, is extremely important to Russia. Also, having the relationship with Iran allows Russia to still try to be a player in Middle East diplomacy. And that goes to your second question, which is the issue of Iran's nuclear program. and the potential resumption of negotiations with the other key stakeholders, whether that's European countries or the United States. In reality, Russia is fairly weak on this point. I mean, Russia might think that they could still be a stakeholder, but the Europeans and the United States, they don't really need Russia's participation in nuclear talks with Iran. They could talk directly to Iran. There are other potential mediators, such as the Qataris, and Russia might think they have a role. They might want to believe they have a role, but realistically, they probably don't have much of a role.
And Ross, how might Iran's demand for security guarantees before resuming talks with the U.S. complicate efforts to revive the nuclear deal or reach new agreements?
It's all but a non-starter. I mean, the United States is not going to guarantee that it won't attack Iran's nuclear weapons program again. So the onus is really on the Iranians. It's to drop ridiculous demands. It's to reach a deal with the other international stakeholders and then stick to the deal. Don't try to make a deal, but then concurrently have a secret nuclear weapons research and development program. Because the United States and Israel, they will discover that. There's really no scenario in which Iran could successfully hide such a program from the United States and Israel. And I think recent events have demonstrated that. So again, the onus is really up to Iran. It's to make a deal with transparency, a deal that drops its nuclear weapons program, and to be transparent and stick to the deal.
And Ross, what are the potential consequences of Russia's positioning itself as a mediator or supporter of Iran's nuclear stance?
It might make Iran toughen its own negotiating position if it still thinks it could rely on the friendship of Russia. But again, the friendship of Russia doesn't mean what it used to mean in years past. Russia is clearly weakened but because of the financial cost of the war, of its invasion of Ukraine. Those costs are only increasing over time. Energy prices have fallen recently, which has cut into Russia's revenue from selling energy to India and China. And now, and now there's the potential threat of higher tariffs imposed by the United States on Russia and India, on China and India if they continue to purchase Russia energy. So Russia is simply not in the position to be that backstop to Iran that Russia might have been when the original JCPOA was negotiated way back in the Obama administration era. So I think the Iranians, again, if they want to be smart about this, they'll drop their nuclear weapons program, they'll agree to a transparent program, and that'll be in return for the lifting of sanctions, and it'll allow a resumption of growth for the Iranian economy and some hope for the Iranian people.
Thank you very much, Ross Feingold, for joining us and sharing your insight as a political analyst. Now we move on to our next news. In the latest updates, at least 67 Palestinians were killed and dozens more injured today after Israeli forces reportedly opened fire on a crowd waiting for humanitarian aid in northern Gaza. The Gaza Civil Defense Agency said the shooting occurred near Gaza City, with spokesman Mahmoud Bassal calling it a direct attack on civilians. The Israeli military has not yet commented on this incident. Now we're joined by Scott Faulkner. He's the head of Eagle Enterprises, a security firm, joining us live from Washington. Thank you, Scott, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, what are the potential and political and also diplomatic consequences for Israel if the reports of firing on civilians waiting for aid are confirmed, if there are any?
I think Israel is really not worrying about public opinion on this, especially in the rest of the world. They are still trying to make sure that Hamas is neutralized. The tragedy in all this is that when you're dealing with urban warfare, it's a very complex situation. When you're dealing with food distribution, especially when you have Hamas fighters and rebel groups trying to intercept these food shipments, both for themselves and to sell on the black market, that when you have some of these food trucks rushed by people who do not identify themselves one way or the other, things happen. Terrible things can happen. And I'm sure the Israeli Defense Forces, Hamas and a lot of the Arab media is trying to say this is a targeted kill. There's no way that Israel is going to be killing civilians consciously. Are civilians getting killed by mistake, and Israel is going to have to make amends for that? Absolutely.
And Scott, how might this incident affect ongoing negotiations in Doha and international efforts aimed at achieving a ceasefire or humanitarian corridor in Gaza?
Probably not much. I think, again, Hamas is trying desperately to, in essence, get a breather, get a break from the action so that they can consolidate and try to figure out their next steps. Israel, on the other hand, is, again, just like the rest of the West, wants Hamas completely neutralized to the point that it can never, ever, ever pose a threat to anybody. But the initial negotiations are Israel wants their hostages back, Hamas would like some of their fighters back, and issues like this don't necessarily complicate that.
Scott, we appreciate your insight. Please stay with us as we move on to our next news. The U.S. President Donald Trump just moments ago pledged to help Afghans detained in the United Arab Emirates after fleeing their country during the Taliban's takeover. Trump said, "I will try to save them starting right now," in a Truth Social post linking to an article about the evacuees held in limbo. Despite previously suspending refugee resettlement and ending deportation protections for thousands of Afghans in the U.S., Trump's latest statement signals a shift. The UAE, a close U.S. ally, agreed in 2021 to temporarily shelter several thousand Afghans evacuated from Kabul. Canada later resettled about 1,000 of them in 2022. Following a U.S. request, the exact number still held in the UAE remains unknown. Nearly 200,000 Afghans have been brought to the United States by President Joe Biden's administration, including relatives of Afghan American military personnel and those who supported the U.S. during the 20-year war. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Scott Faulkner. Thank you, Scott, for staying with us. Now, what are the broader implications of inconsistent U.S. refugee policies on America's credibility and moral leadership, particularly for allies who supported U.S. missions abroad?
Well, the Afghan refugee situation had several phases. The first was just to get the individuals out of harm's way. And even I was involved with getting key people who were allies of the United States out of Afghanistan. Some went the ones I worked with actually went to India. So you have this, in essence, Afghan diaspora in all of these different parts of the world. Trump, of course, wants to make sure that bad people don't come to the United States, that people who do come are properly vetted. So his initial plan was really not a ban on Afghan refugees coming to the United States, but more of a pause to make sure that like in the initial wave under Biden, a lot of people rushed those planes and we really didn't know who they were, whether they were friend or foe. Trump is trying to be much more methodical, and so it is not an inconsistent policy, it's just simply a prudent policy.
And Scott, now what might be motivating President Trump's sudden shift in tone regarding these Afghan detainees?
A lot of colleagues of mine who are very involved with Afghan issues have probably been doing back channel to the Trump administration and to Trump himself, saying, listen, these people are real. They are people who helped us in different ways during our time in Afghanistan. They need to have a permanent future as opposed to being sitting in temporary situations in the various other countries. And I'm sure that eventually this argument for to basically say these people need a permanent home finally swayed enough people to change the policy. I don't think there was any other agenda behind the agenda. I think it was just a case that with Trump basically, we like to say, operating on Trump times. So many things are happening in America and the world right now during his administration that it finally got a fair hearing in the right place and the right decision was finally made.
And now looking at the latest statements from President Trump, what expectations might arise from allies currently hosting displaced populations such as UAE?
Well, I think again that that if these people ultimately come to the United States as permanent residents, as hopefully on a pathway to citizenship, then you figure that these countries, whether it's UAE, whether it's India, whether it's other places, a lot of these people, because they're temporary, they are really not settling in. They're probably on different types of relief and welfare, and so that's a burden to these countries. And so having them move to a permanent home where they can settle in, they can get a real job, they can be incorporated into our country is going to be hopefully welcomed by all these sort of temporary hosts.
Yes, indeed. Now, thank you very much, Scott Faulkner, for joining us today and sharing your insight as the head of Eagle Enterprises, a security firm. Now we move on to our next news. In Kenya, prominent human rights activist Boniface Mwangi has been arrested and is expected to be arraigned on Monday on suspicion of facilitating terrorist acts linked to last month's deadly anti-government protests. Police say Mwangi was taken into custody on Saturday. The activist also faces charges of unlawful possession of ammunition. The arrest comes in the wake of violent protests triggered by the death of political blogger Albert Ojwang in police custody last month. The government-funded Human Rights Commission said at least 19 people were killed during demonstrations on June 25th, with another 31 killed when protests resumed on July 7th. Mwangi, a vocal anti-corruption campaigner and former parliamentary candidate, has frequently clashed with authorities. Now we are joined by Eric Wahlberg. He's a political analyst joining us live from Toronto. Thank you, Eric, for joining us today. Good to see you. Is the arrest of Boniface Mwangi a legitimate national security response or a politically motivated attempt to silence the dissent, according to you?
Definitely the latter. Mwangi is a human rights activist. He is not a violent person. He is well-liked, popular, and young, and he's obviously a political threat to the government. The government is also become very authoritarian in the last year, and even its own human rights authority claims quite a few killings. Unofficially, it's more like 100 in the last couple of months of people that have been killed in peaceful demonstrations. And the police corruption and brutality is quite significant now. The president even told them, police, to shoot in the leg demonstrators, just to incapacitate them and to terrorize them. So this is a very bad sign that Kenya is descending into a more or less corrupt authoritarian regime.
And Eric, now how do these charges that are held against him, the charges of terrorist acts against Mwangi, impact Kenya's image internationally, especially regarding human rights and freedom of expression?
Yes, definitely it's a problem. And the government is not responding well. So this will continue to fester, this issue. And by arresting the prominent and well-liked representative, they are just giving him more credibility as an alternative. So he did run in elections, but he's being persecuted. So this is something that will create pressure against him from the international community.
Eric Wahlberg, thank you very much for that insight. Please stay with us as we stay on the news. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will visit the United Kingdom and the Maldives from July 23rd to 26th. The Ministry of External Affairs has announced today. In the UK, Prime Minister Modi will meet with his British counterpart Keir Starmer for wide-ranging talks on bilateral ties, including trade, defense, tech, health, and education. He's also expected to meet King Charles III during this fourth visit to the UK. Both leaders will review progress under the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership and discuss key regional and global developments. Prime Minister Modi will then travel to the Maldives on July 25th, becoming the first head of government to visit during President Mohamed Muizzu's tenure. Significantly, he will be the guest of honor at the Maldives' 60th Independence Day celebrations on July 26th. He'll also meet President Muizzu to review progress on the India-Maldives joint vision for a comprehensive economic and maritime security partnership. The visit highlights India's focus on regional diplomacy under its Neighborhood First policy and Vision Mahasagar. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Eric Wahlberg. He's a political analyst. Thank you, Eric, for staying with us. Now, what are the strategic significance of Modi's visit to the Maldives in the growing context of Chinese influence on the Indian Ocean region?
Yes, China is moving everywhere, and India is its great rival in Southeast Asia. Now, the Maldives are islands close to the southern mainland. And there is a part of the Maldives is owned or is possessed by India, specifically Lakshadweep is a big resort. India's turned it, these tiny jewels of the South Pacific. India is trying to turn its part of the Maldives into a tourist destination. So this is, I'm sure, upsetting Maldives the way India is using that northern section of the Maldives for its own commercial and purposes. And the Maldives is Muslim, and India is persecuting its Muslims in a very severe way now. The Hindutva ideology is what Modi is elected on. He's very strongly Hindu and anti-Muslim. So the Maldives, does not look to India for protection. And in fact, there are Indian troops in the Maldives, and there's a campaign, India Out. So this is, it's not surprising that Maldives has turned to China as a kind of counterbalance. And China's happy to move in, although it's probably got similar ideas as India for what to do with islands like these in the South Pacific. So I hope this does not turn into a serious problem. India and China are trying to work together. They are both in BRICS, and this is very important that they have a united front against Trump and against U.S. attempts to bully them both. So it's a very complicated situation, and I hope that Modi, really, he has to be very careful when China is there lurking as the rival. So I think it's a situation that's stable, but let's hope that there are nothing serious happens to upset the stability, and that the Maldives can get rid of their Indian troops and live peacefully in the region.
Thank you very much, Eric Wahlberg, for joining us and sharing your insight as a political analyst. Now we move on to our next news. At least 3 people have died and many more are feared trapped after a passenger ferry caught fire off the coast of Telis Island in Indonesia's North Sulawesi province today. The ferry KM Barcelona V was carrying around 280 people on its way to Manado port when flames engulfed its upper decks around 1:30 p.m. local time. Terrified passengers were seen jumping into the sea, many clinging to life jackets or floating debris to survive. Nearly 150 people have been rescued by a combined team of search crews and local fishing boats. Authorities have launched an investigation into the cause of the fire, with possible triggers including electrical faults or engine malfunction. Rescue operations remain ongoing. In South Korea, 2 people have died and at least 5 are missing after torrential rains triggered landslides and flash flooding in the northern country of Gapyeong today. A landslide engulfed several houses and a campsite in the area, killing a man in his 40s and leaving 2 family members unaccounted for. Firefighters say 24 other people were stranded and 1 person was dramatically rescued using a zip line over a swollen river. Another victim was airlifted to safety by helicopter. The disaster has brought the nationwide death toll to at least 17 since heavy rains began last Wednesday, with 11 people still missing and over 13,000 forced to evacuate their homes. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has called for swift damage assessment and the prompt designation of special disaster zones to mobilize additional state aid. Now let's take a look at some stories from the world of Europe. Anti-immigration protests swept across Poland as thousands marched in dozens of cities. Led by far-right groups, Konfederacja politicians warned of a migrant flood, though official figures don't back their claims. Police say 3,000 people joined the biggest rally in Katowice, while Warsaw saw peaceful counter-demonstrations. Meanwhile, a Venezuelan man has been arrested in a murder case that fueled tensions. Michael Flatley, the famed creator of Riverdance, says he hasn't ruled out running in Ireland's upcoming presidential elections. Speaking with the media, the 67-year-old said he's been asked by several people to enter the race. The current president, Michael D. Higgins, cannot run again after 2 terms. Flatley noted his decades of promoting Irish culture globally and said he's unsure if Ireland needs another politician, adding he wants to be a true voice for the people. Irish police have arrested a man in his 40s after 1.6 million euros worth of herbal cannabis was seized in County Wexford. Gardaí and revenue officers stopped a van in Ballycarrane, uncovering around 80 kilograms of the drug. The suspect was detained at the scene and remains in custody. Forensic Science Ireland is examining the seized cannabis, and the investigation is still ongoing. Irish police say no further action will be taken after reviewing the original investigation into Bishop Eamon Casey, who faced multiple posthumous child sex abuse allegations, including one from his niece. Gardaí confirmed that the National Protective Services Bureau found no new investigation steps to pursue. This follows the disinterment of Bishop Casey's remains from Galway Cathedral. The Diocese of Galway said the remains are now with his family and thanked the public for their understanding and respect during the process. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.
ITV नेटवर्क के